Good evening and welcome to the June 1st, 2021 regular session of Findlay City Council. We will start with roll call followed by the Pledge of Allegiance and a moment of silence.
Mr. Greeno.
Present.
Mr. Haas.
Here.
Mr. Hellman.
Mask on. Here.
Mr. Niemeyer.
Here.
Mr. Palmer.
Present.
Mr. Russell.
Here.
Mr. Schindledecker.
Here.
Mr. Slough.
Here.
Ms. Warnicki. Here. And Mr. Wobser.
Mr. Wobser informed me early on that he was not going to be this evening. He's out on personal business. I would entertain a motion to excuse him. Mr. Slough.
I move to excuse the absence of Mr. Wobser.
Second, Mr. Greeno. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay. Mr. Wobser is excused. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance and a moment of silence. I pledge allegiance
to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I will entertain a motion to accept the previous city council meeting minutes. Mr. Slough.
I move to approve the minutes of the last regular session of council.
Second, Mr. Hellman. Any discussion, questions, or comments? Hearing none, all those in favor of acceptance of the previous city council meeting minutes say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay. They are accepted. We have no add-ons or replacements or removals from tonight's agenda. We have no proclamations, recognition, or retirements. We do have an oral communication. I think I'm going to, Wendy, you want to speak now on the, or do you want to wait? Wendy McCormick's here from Habitat. We do on our agenda have a, I don't know if you want to talk to her prior to or when we look at that ordinance. Wendy, why don't you come up and just tell us give us an update on Habitat first. And then talk to us a little bit about the permit fees, all right?
Very good. Good evening and thank you. I'm Wendy McCormick. I'm the Executive Director for Habitat for Humanity, Findlay Hancock County. A reason for my presence tonight is to respectfully request a continuation of the permits, waiving of permit fees for the building of Habitat homes. You've been doing this since our inception in 2000. And in 2011, it was the last time I was before council, we put a standing request in so I didn't have to come back on an annual basis to request. And at that time, we were looking to increase from basically 1 home a year to 3. So the permits were waived for up to 3 homes was the wording. And I'm grateful and blessed to tell you that we are growing again and looking to go from 2 homes a year to 4 and 6 homes a year in the next several years. So I put a request in to last us a couple of years, which would take us to 6 homes. This year is our first year we're doubling, so we are on track. We're building 2 homes side by side currently over on Harrison Street in the West Park neighborhood. And then we'll build another 2 homes this fall on Elyria within city limits. So we're well on track to doubling. The response from the community has been overwhelming. The need exists. We just completed the housing study in the Housing Coalition, and we're at least 250 single-family units short in our community. And we seem to be one of the few developers building at an increasing scale, especially with the increase in material costs, which we don't know the full impact on Habitat yet. We think we got in under the wire for our spring homes, but we're surely going to feel the impact this fall for our fall homes. So the continuation of this really not only contributes to community, we are turning our neighborhoods into tax-paying neighbors. And where there was once vacant land, we now have beautiful Habitat homes. Our homeowners, none have experienced foreclosure. They're all current, even during COVID, on their payments, which goes to show the stability and reinforcement of services that we provide these families for success and the stability that homeownership provides a homeowner. So we respectfully request, again, a standing one, so you don't have to see me every year. I gladly will come back every year if you'd like me to. But this would last us probably 3 to 4 years before we would look to grow again, to waive all the permit fees. That would include water, sewer, sidewalk, and if there's any rezoning that would need to be done for up to 6 homes.
Any
Glad
questions?
to answer any questions.
Mr. Hellman?
Yes, Ms. McCormick, could you address the issue of volunteers and corporate sponsorships in this economy? Are you still able to find people to build 4 houses a year and the companies to sponsor that?
It's been a challenge. Last year, we were blessed that we did meet our 3 goals, or our 3 home goal last year, and that was due to the faith-based community who really stepped up to help us. We are just now experiencing that the corporate entities are starting to come back. They're starting to allow their volunteers and their employees to do team building activities, but it's really taken a hit. So we've had to approach individuals in order to make up for some of that corporate deficit from fundraising. For example, Whirlpool usually did a golf outing every year for us, and they've had to cancel, and they still might cancel this year. So the corporate world is not all the way back yet, but we've had some generous individuals that have made this growth possible, but it's not sustainable for what we need to do. We require almost 400 volunteers on each house, and in the past that was usually all done through a whole day with Whirlpool, a whole day with Cooper Tire, a whole day with Marathon, and all our normal friends in the community, and we have experienced a significant deficit in that. We're getting by, but it's been a challenge.
Thank you.
Any other, Mr. Russell?
Well, not specifically related to your request, but I know that Habitat had looked at the property on the bend on North Blanchard. Is that still being worked through, or where are you at with that?
Absolutely. We own that property, and then there was a piece of that the city actually vacated, and we also own that piece. We've, with Hancock County Regional Planning, have submitted a grant to the state, which was awarded for a phase 1 and a phase 2 environmental, because the nickel plating site, the Superfund site, is adjacent to our property. We just had a meeting with Mayor, and phase 1 and phase 2 are complete, and our site is contaminated on the west end. And so our next steps are to take that information to our board to determine what we will be doing with that property. So we're not sure. There is a limited risk to the east side of that property, but we're not sure we're ready to take any risks yet to develop. So we'll get back to you on that. But we do own that property, and if we're not going to develop it, we would put it up for sale with the information of the phase 1 and phase 2. We would come back to the city and ask before sale if you would want that vacated piece of property back. So we would be respectful enough that if we aren't going to put Habitat homes on it, do you want that property back?
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Thank you. Thanks for the update.
Thank you.
Okay, petitions.
An hourly vacation request for Wilson Street from Florence Wells of the northernmost 3.3705 feet to the first north-south alleyway east of Wilson Street.
Questions or comments? We'll refer this to the Planning Commission and P&Z. Written communications, we have none. Reports of municipal officers and departments.
Officer shareholders disclosure form from the Ohio Department of Commerce Division of Liquor Control for Hazelton Brothers LLC, located at 335 East Walnut Street, first floor and patio in Findlay, for a D5 liquor permit. Check of the records show no criminal record for those who applied.
Mr. Slough.
I would move no objection be filed.
Second, Mr. Palmer. Any questions or comments? Hearing none, all those in favor that no objection be filed, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No objection will be filed.
A letter from Police Chief Robert Ring regarding a refund from Motorola.
Questions or comments? Letter to be filed.
A letter from Police Chief Ring regarding various mental health grants.
Questions or comments? Letter to be filed.
A letter from Service Safety Director Martin regarding 2021 FAA Airport Coronavirus Response Grant Program project number 352-11700.
Questions or comments? Letter to be filed.
Traffic Commission minutes for May 17th, 2021.
Questions or comments? Minutes to be filed.
City Planning Commission minutes of May 13th, 2021, as well as the agenda of June 10th, 2021.
Questions or comments? Minutes and agenda to be filed. We have no committee reports. Legislation.
First reading for Resolution 12, 2021. A resolution authorizing the mayor of the city of Findlay, Ohio to waive zoning permit fees required through the city's engineering department for up to 6 Habitat for Humanity single-family homes scheduled to be built each year beginning in 2021, and also to waive water and sewer tap fees each year for said future Habitat for Humanity single-family homes.
Questions or comments? Well, I'm sorry. There is no questions or comments. I'm entertaining a motion. Mr. Slott.
I would move for adoption of Resolution 12, 2021.
Second, Mr. Greeno. Now, questions or comments? Mr. Hellman.
Yes, I would like to abstain from voting on this since my wife serves on the board for Habitat for Humanity.
Duly noted.
While I support the request.
Duly noted. Any other questions or comments? Hearing none, all those in favor of Resolution 12-2021, say aye if your name is called. Those opposed, nay.
Mr. Greeno.
Aye.
Mr. Haas.
Aye.
Mr. Hellman.
Abstain.
Mr. Niemeyer.
Aye.
Mr. Palmer.
Aye.
Mr. Russell.
Aye.
Mr. Schindeldecker.
Aye.
Mr. Slough.
Aye.
And Ms. Warnicki.
Aye.
The resolution is adopted.
First reading for Resolution 13, 2021. A resolution approving the expenditures made by the auditor's office on the attached list of vouchers which either exceed the purchase order or were incurred without a purchase order, exceeding the statutory limit of $3,000, all in accordance with Ohio Revised Code 5705.41D.
Mr. Slott.
I would move for adoption of Resolution 13, 2021.
Second, Mr. Hellman. Questions or comments? Hearing none, all those in favor of Resolution 13-2021, say aye if your name is called. Those opposed, nay.
Mr. Haas.
Aye.
Mr. Hellman.
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer.
Aye.
Mr. Palmer.
Aye.
Mr. Russell.
Aye.
Mr. Schindeldecker.
Aye.
Mr. Slough.
Aye.
Ms. Warnicki.
Aye.
And Mr. Greeno.
Aye.
The resolution is adopted. Ordinances.
Third reading for ordinance 2021-38, an ordinance authorizing the mayor, acting service director of the city of Findlay, Ohio, to advertise for bids and enter into contracts with option years for the purchase of the materials, chemicals, and service agreements needed by the various departments of the city of Findlay, Ohio, commencing January 1st, 2022, and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Russell.
Move for adoption of ordinance 2021-038.
Second, Mr. Haas. Any questions or comments or discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of ordinance 2021-038, say aye if your name is called. Those opposed, nay.
Mr. Hellman.
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer.
Aye.
Mr. Palmer.
Aye.
Mr. Russell.
Aye.
Mr. Schindeldecker.
Aye.
Mr. Slough.
Aye.
Ms. Warnicki.
Aye.
Mr. Greeno.
Aye.
And Mr. Haas.
Aye.
The ordinance is adopted.
Third reading for ordinance 2021-43, an ordinance authorizing the mayor and/or service safety director of the city of Findlay, Ohio, to enter into an agreement for the purchase of a traffic and fabrication shop for the city of Findlay's Public Works Department located on Quarry Street, appropriating funds and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Hellman.
I'll move for the adoption of ordinance number 2021-043.
Second, Mr. Greeno. Discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of ordinance 2021-043, say aye if your name is called. Those opposed, nay.
Mr. Niemeyer.
Aye.
Mr. Palmer.
Aye.
Mr. Russell.
Aye.
Mr. Schindeldecker.
Aye.
Mr. Slough.
Aye.
Ms. Warnicki.
Aye.
Mr. Greeno.
Aye.
Mr. Haas.
Aye.
And Mr. Hellman.
Aye.
The ordinance is adopted.
Second reading for ordinance 2021-45, an ordinance vacating a certain portion of a certain alley hereinafter referred to as the Bright Avenue Vacation in the city of Findlay, Ohio.
Okay, next.
Second reading for ordinance 2021-46, an ordinance vacating a certain portion of a certain alley hereinafter referred to as the West Main Cross Street Vacation in the city of Findlay, Ohio.
Okay, next.
First reading for ordinance 2021-49, an ordinance appropriating funds and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Russell.
This ordinance, just like 2021-50 and 2021-52, are all pretty routine. Just moving of money, especially grant money that we have received, and for that reason, I would I would move to suspend our council statutory rules and give ordinance 2021-049 its second and third reading.
Second, Mr. Niemeyer. All those in favor of suspending the rules say aye if your name is called. Those opposed, nay.
Mr. Palmer?
Aye.
Mr. Russell?
Aye.
Mr. Schindeldecker?
Aye.
Mr. Slough?
Aye.
Ms. Warnicki?
Aye.
Mr. Greeno?
Aye.
Mr. Haas?
Aye.
Mr. Hellman?
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer?
Aye.
The rules of council have been suspended, and the clerk will give this ordinance its second and third reading.
Ordinance 2021-49, ordinance 2021-49.
Mr. Schindeldecker.
Move for approval of ordinance 2021-049.
Second, Mr. Greeno. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of the ordinance say aye if your name is called. Those opposed, nay.
Mr. Russell?
Aye.
Mr. Schindeldecker?
Aye.
Mr. Slough?
Aye.
Ms. Warnicki?
Aye.
Mr. Greeno?
Aye.
Mr. Haas?
Aye.
Mr. Hellman?
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer?
Aye.
Mr. Palmer?
Aye.
The ordinance is adopted.
First reading for ordinance 2021-50, an ordinance appropriating funds and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Russell.
Move that council statutory rules be suspended and ordinance 2021-050 be given its second and third reading.
Second, Mr. Hellman. All those in favor of suspending the rules say aye if your name is called. Those opposed, nay.
Mr. Schindeldecker?
Aye.
Mr. Slough?
Aye.
Ms. Warnicki?
Aye.
Mr. Greeno?
Aye.
Mr. Haas?
Aye.
Mr. Hellman?
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer?
Aye.
Mr. Palmer?
Aye.
And Mr. Russell?
Aye.
The rules of council have been suspended, and the clerk will give the ordinance its second and third reading.
Ordinance 2021-50, ordinance 2021-50.
Mr. Greeno.
Move for adoption of ordinance 2021-050.
Second, Mr. Haas. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of the ordinance say aye if your name is called. Those opposed, nay.
Mr. Slough?
Aye.
Ms. Warnicki?
Aye.
Mr. Greeno?
Aye.
Mr. Haas?
Aye.
Mr. Hellman?
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer?
Aye.
Mr. Palmer?
Aye.
Mr. Russell?
Aye.
And Mr. Schindeldecker.
Aye.
The ordinance is adopted.
First reading for ordinance 2021-51. An ordinance authorizing the mayor of the city of Findlay, Ohio to enroll the city of Findlay in the Bureau of Workers' Compensation Group Retrospective Rating Plan and declare an emergency. First reading for ordinance 2021-52. An ordinance appropriating funds and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Russell.
Move that council statutory rules be suspended and ordinance 2021-052 be given its second and third reading.
Second, Ms. Warnicki. All those in favor of suspending the rules say aye if your name is called. Those opposed, nay.
Ms. Warnicki?
Aye.
Mr. Greeno?
Aye.
Mr. Haas?
Aye.
Mr. Hellman?
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer?
Aye.
Mr. Palmer?
Aye.
Mr. Russell?
Aye.
Mr. Schindeldecker?
Aye.
And Mr. Slough.
Aye.
The rules of council have been suspended, and the clerk will give the ordinance its second and third reading.
Ordinance 2021-52, ordinance 2021-52.
Mr. Schindeldecker.
Move for approval of ordinance 2021-052.
Second, Mr. Greeno. Discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of ordinance 2021-052 say aye if your name is called. Those opposed, nay.
Mr. Greeno?
Aye.
Mr. Haas?
Aye.
Mr. Hellman?
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer?
Aye.
Mr. Palmer?
Aye.
Mr. Russell?
Aye.
Mr. Schindeldecker?
Aye.
Mr. Slough?
Aye.
And Ms. Warnicki.
Aye.
The ordinance is adopted. Old business. New business. Mr. Russell.
Councilman Wobser asked me that I call or announce a strategic planning committee meeting for next, or 2 Tuesdays from now, June 15th at 5:30 p.m. here in council chambers. The purpose is to review the applications we have for our request for quote, I think it is. So 5:30 strategic planning, June 15th. In addition, Planning and Zoning Committee will be meeting on Thursday, June 10th at noon in the council office. So Thursday, June 10 at noon for planning and zoning, and that one should be a pretty quick meeting.
Under new business, Ms. Mayor.
Good evening, lovely to see you all. Just one point of clarification on the strategic planning. Well, we won't be reviewing all of the proposals that we have received, given it's just this next day, but I will be providing copies of all of the requests for qualifications received, and we'll be going over how to review those and provide feedback. A couple of other notes. Would be remiss without mentioning, obviously yesterday we got to celebrate Memorial Day, and certainly it was a wonderful parade and memorial service recognizing those who have given the ultimate sacrifice to protect our country. And we're very grateful for the many individuals who serve our country in the armed forces and have retired from that. We know we have a couple of military members within our own ranks, so thank you for your service to our country, and we're very glad that you continue to be able to be here with us. Just so you all are aware, working with the law director in the auditor's office, we received contact from the mayor of Port Clinton. Obviously, they sustained a good amount of damage last weekend and had reached out to see if they could borrow some of our equipment to help in that recovery effort. So we will be sending a bulldozer up to them probably tomorrow, just working through the side of details, but happy to help out our neighbors. We understand how storms can wreak havoc on our community, so happy to help them. Just wanted to make you aware of that. Certainly happy to have Wendy here, and thank you for supporting the resolution to be able to support their efforts within our community, and great to see their efforts continuing to grow. As Wendy mentioned, we are continuing to work through the Blanchard property, and as she mentioned, very limited contamination on the west side. So we'll continue to work through what is the viability of developing that property. Appears to be safe, no concerns from the environmental review committee, but want to make sure that we take extra precautions to make sure it's appropriate. But thank you for your all support in working with Habitat on that, supporting applications for grants to secure funding to get those applications done. So far, you will receive a formal report on the DORA, but wanted to just keep you abreast. At this point, we have had no complaints, no issues from law enforcement side, no issues from downtown property owners, no issues. All I have heard so far, knock on wood, is that it's going very well and that our restaurants are really seeing utilization. I know I had one business tell me that they went through 4 sleeves of cup last week because they had so many folks that were waiting for tables and were able to get their drink and walk around downtown and do so safely. And that also then helped them turn those tables because you didn't have folks kind of lingering after their meal. So I think it is serving exactly the purpose that we wanted it to, supporting our downtown businesses, getting people out and about, and doing so in a safe manner. Our COVID numbers continue to go down, which is great. I sent you all an email this afternoon related to the protocols within the city of Findlay properties. Tomorrow, masks will not be required, and coordination with the state mandates being lifted. Folks that are not fully vaccinated are encouraged to wear masks, but just continuing to encourage our employees to be wise and when they're in groups, make good decisions, but also recognizing that many of our employees have gotten vaccinated and hopefully continuing to encourage those that have not to get vaccinated. Our finances are looking pretty strong so far. Year to date, we're up 15% year over year. Comparing to 2019, we're up about 4%. So obviously we'll continue to monitor that, but May was a strong month, and if we were to take where we are so far and then take the numbers from June through December of 2020, if those collections stayed the same as last year, we would end the year about 7% above last year. So overall, looking pretty stable. And then finally, the item that you may have seen on the City Planning Commission agenda related to duplexes and triflexes. Just wanted to provide a little more context. This is something that, because of the zoning map update, are now in compliance because they're in the proper zoning, or are in the proper zoning and then also meeting any of the parking requirements in those items. And so what we are doing is, instead of those property owners having to come and do zoning applications and pay and go through this process, if they are meeting those requirements, they have been notified that they are meeting those requirements. They can opt out if for some reason they do not want to be listed as legal conforming properties. Otherwise, we will be doing an update that will update over 700 properties to legal conformance. So this means they are currently operating as a duplex, meeting all of the requirements of our zoning code to be considered a legal duplex, and will receive that designation within our records. So this is a good way to make sure that people have the documentation they need if they were going to go and sell their property, making sure we also have complete records on our end. But I want to be very clear, this is not making new duplexes or triplexes. This is just better documenting the duplexes and triplexes that are meeting our current standards and giving them documentation. The next phase will be working with properties that we are not sure if they are meeting. We are reaching out to all of them saying, hey, we have some concerns, can you provide this information? And then we will do the same things that if they are able to meet the requirements such as parking, proof of different items, then we will bring those before you as well. So just trying to do some cleanup and make an easy process for those property owners. I believe that is it from my side. Are there any questions?
Mr. Schindeldecker?
Considering that the first Independence Day of the year is tomorrow, perhaps we have to have at least, I hate to see these long meetings drag on, but at least a brief discussion. For example, are we going to continue the seating pattern that we have had for the past year?
So according to your prior rules, you would not be required to do anything such as masking or keep our current seating arrangement. I would expect based off of prior conversations that we will move back to our seating. But certainly if folks have concerns, I would reach out to President Harrington and myself, and we can discuss. I don't necessarily hate sitting out here, being able to watch you all the whole time a little bit better. But per the rules, there would not be any restrictions per the city of Findlay and what I'm advising to all of our employees. There would not be restrictions either.
My recommendation would be that we move council back to their original seats prior to, and that as long as you've been vaccinated, you would not be required to wear a mask. I would recommend if you've not been vaccinated that it would be optional to wear a mask. I would encourage that. There's the science is kind of both sides to that. But if everybody agrees with that, at our next meeting, that's going to be my recommendation. Hearing no objections, I think that's what's good. Of course, Mr. Hellman's got to object.
No, I'm not objecting.
I'm just kidding.
I just got one piece of new business. Based on the mayor's announcement, I guess I've got a bunch of these masks that I'll sell half price. I'm glad to get rid of them.
You were used.
If I may, just one other comment, since Mr. Schindeldecker kind of prompted my memory. We're still a ways out, but 4th of July, fireworks are planned as normal, and there will be a number of events that will occur at the fairgrounds related to that. I know the Fair Board has been working closely with the Health Commission to make sure that they're following proper protocols, but fortunately outdoor events are much safer, and we're going to continue to encourage folks to get to celebrate the 4th of July holiday. So excited to communicate that, and they're doing a great job, but just we'll throw that out there as well.
Any other questions for the mayor? Hearing none, thank you. Real quick on that, when you show up to the next city council meeting, please note where your name plaques are, so because when we did shuffle this around, we make sure, even though you've been maybe sitting where you are now on that side of the room, that could change. So I would appreciate that. Any other new business? Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Mr. Slough.
So moved.
Second, Mr. Palmer. All those in favor of adjourn, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay. We are adjourned.
Step right up. Mr. Sloan, so you want to? Half off.
Grandma Goldstein would be very proud.
How much were they to begin with?
I usually
Because they're
goes
clear
for
at
about
some-
50 cents.